we're going to learn about the query functions extension for Gato GraphQL. Query functions is a compilation of utilities to help us build more powerful queries. Here I have a persistent query demonstrated the several utilities and how to use each one of them. The first one is called field to input, and this is a custom feature added to this GraphQL server that what it does is to be able to retrieve a value in the query that we have just queried in order to manipulate it and change its value into something else. In this case, we're fetching the excerpt from all of the posts, and this is the field to input feature, where we are referencing the field that we have just retrieved, and we do something with this. In this case, we are calculating if this value is empty, and we assign it under this new field called isEmptyExcerpt. And once again, now we can reference this other field isEmptyExcerpt here and calculate its opposite value, and we will save it and with field is not empty excerpt. So when we run this, here we are, we can see that this post has an excerpt, and so it says, is it empty? False. Is it not empty? True. And like this for all of the fields. Second one, we're going to demonstrate the utility called field value iteration and manipulation. This is a collection of directives to help us iterate through the values of a field. In this case, we have the post, we're selecting the category names. So this is an array of values. And with the directive under array item, we can select a specific item from that array and then apply some function to it, some other directive that will change its value. So when we run this, we can see that the first item from the array has been transformed to uppercase. In this case, we have two items. The first one has been transformed. In this case, we have three items. Only the first one has been transformed, and so on. In addition to selecting one single item, we can just iterate through the list of all of the items in the array. In this case, we have the directive under each array item. And in this case, we're going to prepend the tag names with the string tag. So when we run this again, here we have tag names, and they have been prepended with that string that we just passed. And we can also access the values from JSON objects, not just arrays. So in this case, for instance, we are going to invoke the WordPress REST API to get a response, which is a JSON response. And then from this JSON response, we can access a specific key from a specific property from that JSON object using the directive under JSON object property. Let's first run this without the directives to see what we get back. So this is the typical response from the WordPress REST API. So now we're going to transform this response by accessing the value under type here and under title.rendered here. We can provide a key or a path to a certain entry. So we uncomment this and we run this again. And now we can see that the type has been transformed to uppercase, and the title.rendered has been transformed to lowercase. All right, next utility is called field on field. And what this allows is to be able to execute a field over the value from another field. So in this case, we are going to fetch the title of a post. And then we use this directive called pass onwards to pass this value under a variable called input. And then we can apply another field. In this case, we have the field called underscore str uppercase. We're going to apply that value into this GraphQL variable with this GraphQL variable called input. And finally, we'll set that new value into the response of this field. So if we execute this without the directive, we will get the hello world response. And with applying the field on field, we have transformed this value into uppercase. Let's see another example for this one, something a bit more meaningful. In this case, we have a query, a string that represents a CSV. And with this field called strParseCSV, we can transform this into a CSV object. Let's see what we get. Okay, this is what we get from parsing the CSV. It's an array of objects where each entry, the property is numeral 0, numeral 1, numeral 2, numeral 3. So we don't want this. We want to extract just the values and obtain an array of arrays with the values. So now we can use the field on field. We can iterate through the list of all of these items, this array with all of the JSON objects, and pass the value onwards as JSON object. And here we apply the field called object values that given a JSON object, it will extract its value. And finally, we'll set that new value on the response, which is basically on the item from within the array. So now when we run this again, we can see that now these objects have been transformed into the corresponding array with just the values from it. All right, next one. Next utility is called conditional field manipulation. And this is the directive if and the equivalent unless, which is basically the opposite of if, which will execute a condition, another directive, if this condition is true. So in this case, we have users, and we fetch the name from the users, and we pass this and the variable called username. Let's first run this to see what we get. So these are the names from all of the users. And now we have a condition here we apply called inArray that will pass this value onwards as a GraphQL variable called isSpecialUser, which is if the username is either author Marquez or blogger Davenport, this is considered a special user, and then this variable isSpecialUser will have value true. And when that happens, then that value here now will be transformed to uppercase. So we run this query, and now we can see that author Marquez and blogger Davenport have both been converted to uppercase. All right, next utility is called field default value, which is the directive called default that gives a default value when the value is true. When the value is null. So in this case, we're going to select the feature image from the Hello World post. And as we can see, feature image, it is null. So by saying default, if it is null, now it will select a default value, which is the media item with ID 1362. Next one is called field response removal. This is another custom feature from this GraphQL server, which is the addition of this remove directive that allows to remove a field response from the output. And the idea is that there are some fields that we don't need to print because they're just helpful in executing the query, and we don't really need this information anymore. So in this case, for instance, we're going to execute an HTTP request against a URL that we are transforming, or we are creating dynamically. We are getting the site URL from the WP options table, the site URL settings on the WordPress site. And given that, I'm going to attach the string for the WP REST API. And then having this request URL, I'm going to execute the HTTP request against that URL to get this response. So if we execute this, here we got, this is the site URL, the domain of the site, then we have the request URL that we just created dynamically, and here we have the response. But I just want the response. This information, I don't need it. Then we can remove it. I use the directive called remove, and now if I run this again, there we are. We are only printing the response from the HTTP request, and we are not printing the information that we don't need. And finally, the last utility is called the response error trigger, which is a field called fail and a directive called fail. And the idea is to make explicit that there is a condition that denotes an error. In this case, we can say there is some value in the database that we are not expecting it, and then we can say this is an error, and we say that in the query. So let's first run the field. So the field fail runs always, and we can run this as in a conditional query that we execute. For instance, when if some condition happens, then execute this query operation to trigger this error. If the problem does not happen, then do not execute this query operation. So in this case, how we can see, we're simply saying message some error. Here we are. It gives us where is the location of the error. And we can also attach some data. In this case, some key, some value that is also added to the response. And as we can see, we are printing the null value for the fail. The other one is the directive called failed, that it has a condition that it can either be is null, so that the error will happen whenever this value is null. In this case, this post ID, it has a feature image, so this one will not fail. That we are. But if I pass an ID, one which does not have a feature image, the hello world post doesn't have a feature image, and I run this again, now I got an error, the post does not have a feature image. So we are making explicitly an explicit error that this is not what we're expecting. And then we can also raise this error when the value is empty, not just null, but actually empty. In this case, for instance, the raw excerpt will be an empty string, if and we can say that if the raw excerpt is empty, in that case, just trigger the error. So in this case, I'm iterating through a series of many posts, and all of them will give me the error. So when I do that, it says the post does not have an excerpt, and it attaches the ID of the post, and then it says the same, the post does not have an excerpt, and it attaches the ID of the post, and so on and so forth. So it gives me the error for all of the different posts. Alright, I hope that you have enjoyed this tutorial video. Thank you.